For the purpose of this challenge, I chose to play film director and select 5 films that I feel should have been titled differently. I've seen many films throughout my lifetime, and I oftentimes find myself wondering how they get their titles, as titles generally suggest a lot with respect to genre, plot, and themes. Needless to say, many of them can be misleading. It was hard for me to choose just 5, but I managed to narrow them down to the ones I felt were most in need of review. Number 1, Annie Hall. Interestingly enough, there were several suggested titles for this film: Anxiety, Albion Annie, Roller Coaster Named Desire, It Had to Be Jew, and Me and My Guy. But to be honest, I think this one should have been blunt and gone with A Look at Why Relationships Fail. I know it sounds like a comedic, and not to mention academic downer, and not lightheartedly artistic, but the critic in me feels as though people would be drawn to a title like this out of curiosity. Much like how they're drawn to such headlines in magazines that offer pseudo-psychological relationship advice. It also captures what the story is about: a socially awkward and cynical man who clearly shows why his relationships don't last through the use of psychoanalysis, modernism, and satirical comedy. Something that people would be able to relate to when they really think about it. The story doesn't necessarily center on Annie Hall, even if she is the deuteragonist, and the title as is makes it sound more like an autobiographical film than anything else. Number 2, Dirty Pretty Things. As I discussed in my video about it, which I'll link in the comments, this is my favorite film, though it would have been perfect in my eyes if the title were more specific. To be fair, it is an actual line in the film that, poetically, sums up the circumstances plot-wise. But I feel that it could have really been directed toward the subject matter bluntly as a movie title, and not gone down the predictable route of taking an actual line from the script, by going with something catchy like Pretty on the Outside, Ugly on the Inside, to effectively encompass the idea of illegal immigrant exploitation being masked by supposed encouraged diversity and cultural enlightenment in the workforce. Number 3, The Breakfast Club. It's famously known for being one of, if not the best teen film, because of its themes pertaining to teenage struggles to uphold the status quo and stereotypes that they probably don't even believe in, as well as being understood by authoritative figures who themselves have possibly questionable standards. This is why a title such as The Truth About Being a Teenager might have worked better, especially with this being among the first films to actively and actually tackle these issues truthfully, unapologetically, and without filters. Most other films, especially at that time, would only ever gloss over the issues and never really address them, while this one, which isn't actually that comedic to begin with, centers its entire plot on it. The title as is makes it sound like a typical cheesy high school movie musical, even if it is actually the name of the student's nicknamed detention room. Today's expectations and hype might also have something to do with it, as younger generations are admittedly more bored than entertained by it. Number 4, Top Gun. The original film focuses much less on the politics and warfare side of things than this title lets on, and much more on the brotherly and subtextual queer relationships between the pilots. Heck, even the main romance is downplayed. It's only the name of the academy they all go to. It doesn't encompass what actually happens with them. I think a title like Flight Brothers would have been more suitable, given how much emphasis is placed on their dynamic and keeping in mind the time period. And finally, number 5, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Here's another movie I adore that has an on-the-nose title. It's admittedly amusing, given that the film is a neo-noir, black humor murder mystery. But I think that the title really could have driven that fact home with something along the lines of romantic comedy meets murder mystery. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang causes it to be too heavily associated with the comic of the same name, which it's not based on in actuality. This challenge really got me thinking about how the title of a film can influence a person's perspective on it, even before viewing it for the first time. This is especially true for a person who knew next to nothing of it prior. It causes the viewer to have certain expectations, and upon viewing it will be an intrinsic part of the difference between the film doing well or poorly, due to factors including reviews, refund rates, and so on. This sort of thing applies to all types of storytelling, where people will either connect with something or experience dissonance based on how it's marketed.